All right, so if you don't know me, I'm Sam Farhi. I'm the lead instructional designer at EdApp. You might have seen webinars with me before, or maybe videos on YouTube. Well, this webinar is going to go on YouTube as well. So the reason I'm telling you that is because if I'm talking too fast or if I'm going through something too quickly, you can reference this video later or one that's practically like it the next day. So don't feel bad if I'm going too fast or you miss something. There will be an opportunity for you to rewind when it's on YouTube and try it out for yourself. That being said, today we're going over a much requested aspect of EdApp, which is CSS. And this is a skill that is obviously on EdApp's authoring tool. It's a skill that can be developed and used in other places as well. It's a web design language. But before we get started, I think you should open up your EdApp and your admin portals and go into a lesson and go to the branding tab. That's where we've seen the CSS. That's where it is. That's where the one we'll be using. We'll be using it on the lesson level. And if you want to get that out now, that'd be great. And we can try things on the call, okay? Okay, so we're gonna go over a few things today. The first thing I just want to tell you all about, if you haven't joined already, the TrainOn group in LinkedIn is, you're going to get a lot of tips like these. If you have any questions in the future about CSS or anything like that, you can post it in the TrainOn group. And I guarantee you that if you have that question, I'm sure there are other IDs or people working on instructional design that have that question as well. And so if you publicly ask that question, we can publicly answer it, and a lot of people are going to benefit from that. So please join the TrainOn group. I'll let you in, it's private, but everyone here is a personal invitation, and you'll have a great time. Okay, and we are also going to reveal this kind of great document called this EdApp CSS glossary. And I'm going to ask the host or the co-host to send that out to everybody. We will be looking at that as a reference. And this thing is years in the making, and it is super, super helpful. It's more in depth than the one you're going to get on the support site. So it's a secret. It's for you. I put that app logo on it, and it's something you can use when authoring your courses. So another thing, just before we move on to get into the thick of things here with CSS, the TrainOn group, once you join it, you feel free to invite anybody on your team. Feel free to invite other people that want to make workplace training themselves. It's not just for instructional designers. It's also for anybody who has a business or who wants to make some sort of training on EdApp or other places, but really EdApp. So please feel free to invite anybody. It's allowed once you're a member. Okay, so today, the agenda for the day, we are going to discuss a few things. First, we're going to go over what CSS is. What is CSS? What is this thing, CSS? So we will break that down for you. And we're going to also break down what it can do and what it cannot do. So those are things, good things to know. And then we are going to do some practical tips on how you can make your EdApp lessons look fantastic with color, with customized shapes, with fonts. And we are going to really be exploring those things. And then we're going over an advanced aspect or advanced kind of move of putting a shadow on an element. And so once we get down with these basics, we go into a slightly advanced element change. You'll have a really good basis, and I'm going to give you the tools at the end of this talk to go even further with it. So the first thing that I want to go over is to talk about what is CSS. So I'm going to share my screen. Now, I apologize if this webinar goes over a little bit. You'll have to forgive me. We have a lot to talk about, and there's going to be a lot of information here. So I apologize in advance. And if you have to leave early or on time, feel free. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen here. Well, okay, let's actually go over this before I share my screen. What is CSS? The best analogy that I've heard for what CSS is to think of it as in parts of a sentence. So if web development languages were parts of a sentence, the HTML would be the noun, the CSS would be the adjective describing what that noun is, and then JavaScript and other languages would be the verb. So let's say we have a button. So this button is an HTML code says this button exists in this place. The adjective, the CSS is saying this button is this color. This button is this size. It's this shape. It's describing that noun. It's the adjective of that noun. And then the JavaScript would say something like, if I click this button, it will add a friend to my friend list or on my MySpace account, etc. So that's the verb. And we're not going to be touching those verbs at all. We're really, really concerned with the adjectives. But to understand how that works and in EdApp, it's good to know a little bit about HTML and CSS and how they interact with each other. So I'm going to share my screen now and show you how that works. And here's the thing. Before I came to EdApp, I was a Captivate specialist. There was no using CSS, something I learned just using EdApp. And a lot of instructional designers do not use CSS. This is kind of, I don't want to say unique, but I think it is unique to our tool using the CSS. So yeah, so this is a learning experience for everybody. So everybody's on page 1 here. But as we talked about before, the HTML is the noun, the CSS is the adjective. Every website has these elements. So this website here is called w3schools.com, and I'm going to send a link out at the end so you can access it. But I think it's a really good example of how these codes kind of work with each other. So if you look at the code here, what's happening here is dictating what's on this side of the screen. So there are 2 parts of a website's code in the background of things. There's what's called the head and what's called the body, okay? The body is going to be where those objects are, but in the head is where the CSS lives. So if you see over here, it says head, here's the style, and here's the end of the style section, like the New York Times, and here's the end of the head section. And then the body section starts. So what's happening here? Well, these elements in the body, like H1 or P, you can see that H1 is my first CSS example, and P is, this is a paragraph. We look in the style section, we see that H1, the color is white, the text aligned is center. And if we look over here, my first CSS example is centered and it's white. The P element, this is a paragraph, is a different font. It's Verdana, and the font size is different. It's 20 pixels. Okay, so you can see that things that are happening in the head section correspond with the body. So when you're in EdApp, that box that's in the branding course, the branding level. So if I click on a lesson and I go to branding, this box here, this is that style section. So this is going to dictate what the buttons look like. It's going to dictate what the font is. And this is where we are going to change those things. So this is what it looks like, just like if you were to look at the code behind a website, and it looks like you're in a hacker movie, but don't get scared of this thing. It's actually, we're going to demystify it so that it's not so scary looking. But from here to here, this is all we're concerned with. So our box is this section. Okay, so a little bit about CSS, and just we'll move on to really the practical thing. But CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And because it's that adjective element, it really is concerned with more of the artistic and design elements of the objects on a page. So CSS is very much like the artsy cousin of coding. And here's why. In the basic aspects of it, you have the element that you want to change. You have the aspect of the element you want to change and what you want to change it to. However, if this was HTML and even one space was wrong, it would kind of break the code. For CSS, it's much more forgivable. If I wanted to put these things on the same line, it would be on the same line. If I wanted to space it out, it would not change the website over here. It wouldn't change this at all. Now, if I want to change this element, it says light blue. If I just change this to purple and click run, changes the website to purple. So that's what we are going to be doing today. Okay, so here we are. Now let's just see what can happen in a CSS box in an EdApp lesson. First, your EdApp lesson and course already has CSS attached to it. So anything that we change in the CSS box is overriding that code to make it something else. So we're not building these buttons from the ground up. If it says continue or okay, I'm done, that button has a name to it in the coding, but it's not something that it already has CSS attached to it. So we're just simply overriding it. So that's something to remember as well. I'm going to show you an example of just like kind of the cool stuff that CSS can do. So if you look at this and we look at these buttons, see how the color is kind of animating across. If I click on it, we go into the lesson more. And you can see that these buttons are also animated across. And the reason I'm showing you this is because a lot of these elements, like the drag in the word to fill in a blank and the continue button, for example, are actually the same code. So what we're doing is we're not going into the lesson and for every single time, there's a fill in the blank word, there's going to be some fancy code there. We're actually changing just one element and it will customize it throughout the course. And you'll be surprised at the elements that are connected to each other. So all of these are buttons. So if we change the button element, it will all look like this. Okay, so let's get into this. So to change an element, let's take a look at this. We're going to go into this. So let's go to your lesson level. And as you know, in EdApp, there's the course level and the lesson level. We're going to go to the lesson level branding because once we make a change here, we can actually see the difference right away. There's a preview right on the left to see the difference. And so what happens is a lot of people might start EdApp and they go, oh, I don't want to try any of the codes. I can just use the logo in the background, and that totally works. However, if you want to go that extra kind of mile here and really make your lesson feel like it's an app almost built for your company, this is the way to go. And it's actually not as scary as it seems. So that's what I'm here to demystify that. I'm going to, okay, so let's take out our glossary. So I sent out that glossary to everybody. I want to take a look at this. So here's the glossary. And what this is this is the name of all of the elements in EdApp. Okay, so this is everything. This is your muted button. This is your solid button. Those are going to be the drag in and fill in the words. Here's your progress bar. This is that line at the top that the farther you get in the lesson, the more it goes through the line. And here's the corner box. This is where you have your slide count, right? So I'm on slide 5 out of 10. All these other ones, these are selectable buttons. Here's how to change the font, and we'll go over that in a second. But here's the glossary, and I want to show you how to kind of navigate this. The first thing, if we need to change, if we want to describe an element, first we need to know what the name of that element is. So if I wanted to, let's say, take this corner box, right? Let's take that. I'm going to copy and paste this. And I'm going to put it here in my custom CSS. And now I'm ready to change it. There are two really basic and kind of fundamental elements that you can change here. So let's say I want to change the lesson header nav. All CSS has these kind of curly brackets. So find that. It's these kind of parentheses that has the little point on it. And you're going to open and close. So we have this to work in. I'm going to make some space. I'm just putting this here so you can see what it's like. So this is saying, okay, this is going to get modified. And in these brackets is what we're going to modify it to. So I'm going to type in background color, background dash color. I'm going to put a colon. I'm going to type in a random color. I'm going to actually just type in the word red and then a semicolon. And if you see here on the left, that is now red. It's that simple, right? Let's do one more change. We're going to type in color, and let's type in blue. Blue, semicolon. So now you can see I have a blue number and I have a red background. And these two elements, background color and color, I think this is the kind of the place to start. And you can kind of think of it as color always kind of being the text color. Now, sometimes it's not true, but in our case, it is. So color is always going to be the text color pretty much. It's kind of like the foreground and the background, but we don't need to get into that. So here it's going to be blue, it's going to be red. And that's how simple it is. Now you can replace any of these with hex codes. You can change any of these to be your company colors. And that's how you would change that element. Now, if we go back to the glossary, this is, you have a blueprint of that right here. So you don't, you can always use this if you forget that, but you're going to always remember that. Another thing to remember is that when you have these two different things you're changing, you put a semicolon in between it. Now, this is a super forgiving code. I can press space, I can press return, I can arrange this however I want to for my own benefit, and it's not going to affect the upper corner here. So if you've been following along, you just did your first CSS. There it is. Very simple. Now, this color combination is probably something we should change, and we will in a second. But another part of this glossary is, if you look at the top here, these are course elements. The course elements are elements that are not assigned to a specific template. They're just kind of the elements that are throughout the lesson. If I scroll down here, the content templates, these are all these all correspond with the template library and the different categories on the left side. So if you open up the template library, on the left side, you're going to see content. You're going to see concepts. Here are the concepts. Here are the multiple choice. Here are the numbers, and here are the relationships. So all of these categories have elements that you could be more specific on and change. And here are the games, and so on and so forth. Underneath here, we have our CSS properties. These are all the things you can change. So background color, we just used. Color should be in here. There's color, and it will tell you what it is right next to it. So color is text color, right? Yeah, so that's how to navigate this glossary. It's going to tell you a lot of things of how to do this. And this is really the first kind of tool in your toolkit or resource that's going to really help you here. But I'm going to show you this, the top 4 elements here. These 4 elements, I propose to you that all you really need to change are these 4 elements to make your entire lesson custom looking. So let me explain what these elements are. The first element is the "Okay, I'm done" button. And I know you've seen that if you've been building EdApp lessons. And it is called the muted button. Underneath that, we have the solid button. Then we have the indicator, that's the progress bar at the top. And here's, lastly, we have the lesson header nav. This is the slide counter that we just changed to make it red and blue. So I'm actually going to just copy and paste these in here so we can take a look at this. Now, the reason why I'm saying that these 4 elements are all you really need to customize an entire lesson is because, here, I'm gonna take out this extra text, is because first of all, every slide is going to have the indicator. Every slide is going to have that progress bar at the top. And every slide is going to have a button in it. It's either going to be a muted or a solid button. So changing just these 4 is going to do a lot. So let's do that. Let's change these 4. So we have, I'm going to give you guys a second to get all of these 4 in your custom CSS, and we're going to change that. I want to take a look at what questions we have going here. Chat. Okay, we're emailing out the PDF. Okay, great. So we're all on the same page. Great. Chat. Okay, so we're back. Now, hopefully you have these here. If we wanted to do a quick change, you could just copy this background color and color and really just paste it on all of these. And now we have all 4 elements. And if I go through the lesson, and these are ugly colors on purpose so that you can see how these are changed. I wouldn't make a lesson like this with these kind of colors, but just so you can show what it does. So here, we're going through the lesson. There's a button. They're now red and blue. These are not the default buttons. You can make these any colors you'd like, and we'll play around with that in a second. Even the drag and drop interaction is changed. Even the continue button on your takeaway is changed. And this was just from these 4 elements. Even if I click on here where I'm typing in a letter, the letter's changed. And even if I go to the menu's changed. So just these 4 elements can do 90% of the work that you want. Now, once you get more comfortable in CSS and using it, then you can do a lot more fancy stuff. You can make these things move. You can put borders on them and all kinds of stuff. The possibilities are truly endless. And once you find something that you like, you can always copy and paste it. So let me go to the chat. I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page here. Okay, it looks like we're having a little trouble getting the PDF. Raise your hand if you've been following along. Just want to see that. Okay, excellent, excellent. A ton of hands raised. Great, great, great. Okay, so now let's make these look a little bit better. So we are not just having, horrible colors there. I use something called color.adobe.com. Now, you just saw me just type in the word blue and type in the word red. And all that did was give me a really, really kind of straight red. It's not any kind of shade of red, and a really boring blue. And that's kind of just what it did, right? But you can actually use hex codes. So if you are have company colors that you want to be very specific. So like, let's say we made the red. I'm going to go for something a little different. Let's go for like this pink. I kind of like this pink. And let's do something else. What would be a good complementary color to the pink? Now you can use the color wheel here for anything, but I don't want to get into that. I really just want to kind of show you how to use hex codes. So here shows us pink. I'm going to copy this code. If you want to follow along with the color wheel, it's color.adobe.com. Find your colors. I'll give you a second and we'll put them in here. So background color, let's make this one pink. So I'm just copying and pasting that hex code. Hex codes always have a hashtag on them. Let's make this something else. How about this green? Let's make it a kind of a light, nice green. Oh, I lost it. Something like that. This is going to kind of give like a watermelon kind of theme going here. Ooh, you can't really see that. I'm just going to go back to white. Okay. And I want to show you the difference between the solid and muted buttons. So I'm actually going to do a few different colors here. And what I did was, you can actually upload an image. I uploaded the Seychelles flag. I'm a huge fan of that. And I'm just going to copy and paste some of these colors on here. So here's this. Background color is that. Let's do another one of these. Let's do this green. Oh, copied it for me. We go here. Do this. Okay, now I'm just going to copy and paste this on the other things here. Let's do that. So, okay, let's take a look. The muted button is pink, right? The solid buttons were yellow and green, I believe. Yep, and here are the solid buttons. So here you can see the difference between muted and solid buttons. So the solid buttons are corresponding with the drag in the words. They're also corresponding with the takeaway buttons. So see how the takeaway button is yellow and green. If I click here, these are all solid buttons. But on the content slides, you're going to get the muted button. So here you can, because they're two different elements, you can see what the muted button corresponds with and what the solid buttons correspond with. So that's how you change color. And once you get into it more, you can do things like add a border. Let's actually do that. I want to show you how to add a border. This can be very important. So let's go back to branding. To add a border, we're going to look at our glossary. If I scroll all the way down here, underneath where all the templates are, we have our CSS properties. And if you look here, it says border. It's very simple, right? But there are some things happening here. See how it says size, style, and color. What that means is this is what my element will look like. The first element will be the size. The second element will be the style. And the third element will be the color. So we actually have an example right here. Border, 2 pixels, dotted, and red. So let's just copy that as kind of a template for ourselves. Going to add it to the muted button, so it should change right there. Oh, let me get rid of the bracket there and the bracket here. And I don't know if you can see that, but if I zoom in, you could see that there's a dotted line there. Let's make it bigger, 20. Oh my gosh, it's too big. Let's make it 10. Ooh, it's still really big. So this is how you can experiment, see the kind of the sizes you like. I think these are all a little big. 4 pixels, I think, is really big. But this is just to show you what you can do here. I could also change the style. If I go back to my glossary, if you look at border style, here are the different styles that you can do. So a dash style, this is going to be like horizontal little lines, dashes around the element. Solid is probably what I'm going to use. Double is 2 solid lines. You can experiment this on your own. But let's make this solid. And red is a little abrasive. I'm going to make it just a black. I'm probably going to make it 1 pixel. And this little thing that I'm doing here is kind of makes it like cartoonish. It's outlining it with a black kind of pen mark. And now no matter what color this is on, even if it's on a pink image in the background, I'm still going to be able to see it. So I think that's really important when you're messing with the CSS of things, is to make sure that your elements are still clear and that their use is still obvious. You don't want your learner to kind of, is that a button or is that part of the image in the background? You really want it to be obvious that this is something you click on. So I'm going to keep my border there. So because let's say I had a pig farm in the back, you might lose the button. So that's why it's there. Okay. Okay, so those are colors and those are those elements, and that's how you do a border. Let's do another thing. I think that's really important, what we get asked about a lot is the fonts. What are we going to do for fonts? Well, fonts are kind of complicated, but they're also really simple. One thing is, anytime your computer is reading text on a website, it's going back into itself and going, oh, do I have this font that it wants? The website is telling me it should be Helvetica. Do I have Helvetica on my computer? I do. Okay, now the website's going to look like Helvetica. Now, if you want to use a font or that the user might not have, that's why we need fonts that are hosted on another site and for us to import it. Okay, so Google, and that sounds more complicated than it is, but Google Fonts, we use this about 90% of the time in EdApp lessons. It's Google Fonts. I think the other 10%, I use Adobe Fonts. So if you have an Adobe account, same deal as Google Fonts. There might actually be a little bit more fonts. Don't tell Google, but they both are perfectly okay to use, and it can do quite a lot. So what I want to do is pick kind of a funky font so that you can really see the difference between what we can change here. So here's Google Fonts. Here's where you can search for your fonts. Here's where you can type in the sentence so you can see the difference of them. So let's say you have a company font. It's not hosted anywhere. You can't import it from anywhere. You might type in a sentence so you can see the different letters. But the sentence that's here already, it's not one. It can show a lot of the letters that you'll need. Okay, so let's do something interesting. I'm going to go to categories. You probably are familiar with these categories. Serif, sans serif means there's no serifs, right? Display and handwriting. I'm actually just going to go for display right now because I really want to show you what it looks like. Okay, so here's one. This is definitely distinct. I don't think there's even a bold version. So I'm going to select this style. And here it is. So I have Babus new, regular 400 weight, and I have all these things here. First, it has my CSS rules. So if I look at it, it says font family, Babus new, and then cursive. So what this means is that once I put this in there, and hold on, I have to plug in my computer really quickly. 1 second. Okay. This should give everyone a second to follow along. Okay. Okay, I'm back. I hope you've been following along. So here we are. What this is telling the computer is that we want the font to be this font, Babus New. And if you do not have this font on your computer, then any cursive font will do. So that's what these commas mean. And sometimes you'll see these that have many different fonts in them, and it's basically a priority list. It's saying the first one is the first priority. If it doesn't have that, we'll go to the second one. If it doesn't have that, we'll go to the third, and so on. Okay, but the problem is that we probably don't have this font on our computer. So Google has this awesome @import option where, if you see, there are style brackets. It gives you the code to copy and paste into your CSS box. It's really, really nice. So I'm actually just going to copy this. And you can even see the style brackets that we had there. I'm going to copy this, I'm going to paste it. Okay, so now what this is doing is that when I visit this page or this part of my app, it's retrieving the font off of Google and downloading it onto my computer right away. It's importing. So, but now we have to tell the computer what we want to be that font. So if we go back to Google, underneath the import link, here's the rules for what we're typing in for the font. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it, but we're still not done. We have to tell the computer what part of the lesson do we want to be the font. Well, if I want the entire lesson to be this font, I'm going to go to the glossary and you're going to see at the top here, body. Looks blank, but that's what it is. It's just the word body. And that's telling us, if we remember from the HTML, the head and the body is everything. Just saying that everything is going to be this font. So let's give it a shot. And look, we can even see the change already. So now if I go into the lesson, everything is this Babus New font. Look at that. Now, I might, even the indicator up here is that. And if I go put in a word here and press continue, the takeaway is going to be that everything is that, right? So we just put in the head section of the code, this style, and the rest of the body is now that font. Now, what if we say, okay, but hey, I want there to be lowercase letters. I don't want this to look like an abrasive rock flyer poster. I want this to look like something I can read for a long time. Okay, well, we can do that too. We can actually have 2 fonts or more in EdApp. I'm going to show you how to do that because I think it actually gives a kind of a really interesting and really easy and interesting way to make a very dynamic lesson. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that this font is only for the titles. I'm going to make sure that this is only for the biggest text. Okay, and the rest of the lettering, I want to be kind of a more normal font, and I'm going to pair them together. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, if we still have our Google open, this was still selected. It's still here on the side. Now I'm just going to go back and I'm going to get out of display. Let's go into something like a serif or a sans serif. I'm going to decide what font do I want to pair with it. It's like you're pairing wine with a meal. You have to kind of think about what's going to go with that font that we had before. Let's see. Let's do something like this. This is a wide font. It's actually commonly used. And if we do this with that, you'll see the difference between the two. Okay, so here, because this is a more popular font, it's not just like a display font as the other one was. there are all these different weights. And if you're familiar with Photoshop and design programs, you're definitely familiar with these weights. But we're just going to go for the regular, which is 400. I'm actually going to take the italic version too. If I make a word italic, I want it to respond to that. And then I'm going to go with the bold, which is 700. It's usually the bold. I'm not going to take the italic version because I don't do bold and italics. It's just something that I don't do. But if you do that, you can also take that as well. Something to keep in mind, though, is that the more stuff I add here, the more memory, even though it's kind of nominal, is being imported in. It can be slower. So that's why we're not selecting everything and saying import it. We're actually just selecting the stuff that we need so that it has more of a quick response of importing in and replacing all the text, before anyone notices. Okay. So here on the side here, I actually have two fonts now imported. I have this one, which I'm going to use for my titles and things like that. And then this for all the regular text. Okay, so I'm actually gonna take this, go back to the import button. I'm going to now copy this new code that was generated for me. And go back here, I'm gonna replace the old code. You'll see that that's still how it is because the body is still this. And then I'm going back here. And now we have two lines of code here. We have the one we had before, and we have this new one. I'm just going to take the new one. So just the second font that we selected. And now I'm going to paste it here. So now what do we do? How do we make just the big stuff be the Bavis new and everything else be Montserrat? Well, here's how to do it. If you look at the glossary, you're going to see this section called headings with one alternative font. And you'll see H1, H2, H3, H4, H5. So what's up with that, right? Well, what's up with that is that those H1, H2, H3, H4, H5 is corresponding with your Markdown language that you have in the lesson. So if you've been making EdApp lessons, you know that we use Markdown language for sizing. So so basically it means if you have a hashtag and a space, it makes it big. If you put two hashtags in a space, it's not as big. And you put three hashtags in space, it's not as big as that. So those H1, H2, H3, H4, H5 correspond with that. So you can kind of think of it as that many hashtags that are before the word. So let's say I only want the big stuff to be this. I want everything else to be this. I'm going to put my brackets around this just so this is seamless. I'm going to change this from body to H1. And then I'm changing this to H2 space, H3 space, H4 space, H5 space. I don't even need the space there. Okay, so let's see what happened. Go back and preview. So that was a title already. But look, the smaller text is now Montserrat. The big text, because it has one hashtag, is that other font. So if I go to edit lesson content, let's look at it under the hood. So you see it says there's one hashtag. Well, that's H1. Let's see H2. There's H2. Isn't that cool? So now you have two different fonts. They don't really go well together, but that's how you do it. That's how you have multiple fonts. That's how you change your colors of your elements. That's how you put borders on them. And that should really get you started. Now, I think we're a little bit over time. I don't want to go yet. I want to show you one more thing that I think will be helpful to everybody. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Why don't you raise your hand if you have a little bit more time, and it'd be useful for me to go over one more element. Okay, very nice. All right, that's enough people. That's a lot of people raising their hand. Okay, well, let's go over one more element. The last element we're going to go over is the shadow. Okay, the box shadow. What the box shadow does is it makes your image look like, your element look like it's three-dimensional, and that it's there's a background behind it. And I'll show you what it looks like here. So I'm going to share my screen again. Share my screen. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to go back to the W3 school here and show you what this looks like. So here, I'm going to actually copy and paste this to you guys so everyone has it. Stop this. Put this in the chat. How do we do that? Chat. Okay, here we go. Here it is. There you go. So take a look at that. And here you're going to see kind of all these ways to make a box shadow. And it could be kind of basic. So here, this is a red shadow behind the box. And this will be our button in a second, or our indicator. This one is a little abrasive. See how the shadow is all the way back there? And if actually we change this to purple, so you can see it, you see that changes to purple. We can even, and this is what's happening here, is that these two things, these two elements are the X and the Y axis. So if I change this to a positive number, it just goes to the other side of the shadow. And if I make it smaller, it'll bring itself up vertically. Same with this, it could bring itself in a little more horizontally. So now it's really behind the element. Now, if I add a couple of more elements, I'll show you what happens. So if you just have two, so here, if you go down to syntax, you'll see that if I have two elements here and a color, those are the X, the Y, and the color. But let's say I add a third element. This is what happens. You have your X, you have your Y, and then you have your blur radius. Let's see what that does. Blur radius. So this says 6 pixels purple. Let's add another 6 pixels. 6, actually, let's not. Let's do 5 pixels. You see how it's a little bit fuzzier? Let's bring it out a little bit so you can kind of see. It's a little bit, it's not as harsh on the edges. If I even make it a little bit bigger, whoa. This is the magic of CSS. This is where it gets really fun. So what this is doing is it's saying, okay, the background is going to be really blurry. And actually, this is the dictating of how blurry it is. Okay, so you might not want it that blurry. And really, like, let's say this was in a room, it's kind of the lighting effect. Now let's do, what if we added one more element? Add one more in here. 10 pixels. What did that do? Well, what it does is it's the spread radius. If you look at the spread radius, we're actually going to do something more like what this is doing. So if I make the spread radius minus 10 instead of a positive 10, see how it shrinks it? It kind of brings it further behind the element. It makes it look like it's a little bit kind of farther away than the background. If we look at this one, you'll even see that the colors is kind of really behind here. Okay, so I'm going to just give you this thing because we don't have that much time. So I am just going to give this away. I'm going to put this in the chat again. Let's see. And this is a really beautiful shadow I'm giving you guys. So there it is. There it is. That last shadow is going to be kind of a perfect shadow that you can put on a lot of things. And it's going to make your stuff look 3D. So let's see what it looks like. I'm going to put it in my lesson right now. It's in the chat if you want to take a look. Okay, so we're going back to planning for the big events. We go back to branding. We're going to add this shadow to the elements. So the first one I'm going to add it to is that corner slide. Okay, I'm just going to press paste. Oh, actually, I have to get rid of all this. just have the box shadow part in there. If you look really closely there, see that little subtle shadow there? It makes a big difference because now this looks like it's a floating piece on here. Take a look, keep your eye on that muted button. Let's say, take a look at that. You actually, wait, hold on. Let me get the stuff to copy. Okay. All right. Now let's look at that muted button. I'm going to add this. Ooh, it's very subtle, but it makes a big difference. Makes a very big difference. Add it to the solid button. Now let's go through the lesson. See how it kind of has that 3D effect? It's really beautiful. And look, even the fill in the blanks, it looks like it's 3D on the page. And you can even see the shadow responds to the background behind it. It's really transparent. So you can still see some of the hanger in it. So that's that. So this is kind of basic stuff. This will be on YouTube, so you can always rewind and replicate this stuff. And the next time we have a CSS session like this, what we'll do is more advanced things like animating. And there's things you can do, like if I pressed on the button, I can make it look like it's pushing down and coming back up, and things like that. Or having kind of like a gradient and then moving across, or being very subtly moving up and down. There's a lot of things you could do. So we'll go over that in the next CSS session. Okay, thank you everybody for sticking around. Oh, everyone did stick around. That's awesome. That's awesome. If anyone has any more questions, just let me know. Okay, good, good, good. Yeah. Awesome. Great pacing. Good. I was worried I was doing too fast. No problem, everybody. I'm glad everyone found it useful. And we'll do another one of these. In the meantime, join the TrainOn LinkedIn group, and there'll be more stuff like this. And you can always ask questions about CSS. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks. I'm going to sign off. Bye-bye.